Hi, this is Chuck Ladkowski, and welcome to the last week, this last installment on Guardrails. I've extended it an extra week because of the tragedy involving Robin Williams and his suicide. The world and this country has been in a state of shock and disbelief and questioning why. We didn't know. I watched the David Letterman show the other night, and he commented, he said he had known Robin for years and years from before they were famous, and he enjoyed his friendship, and he said, I never knew he was in such pain. Well, the pain of suicide is prevalent here in America. It's the 10th most common cause of death. There are 1 in 5 with depression will make an attempt, but the one statistic that really grabs me is that for every lethal attempt of suicide, there are 16 non-lethal attempts. We hear about the tragedies, and they are tragedies, but for every one of those, there are 16 people who have tried. Here in America, the numbers are growing as measured by the government. As we see these statistics, you'll see that this evidence of suicide rose, it jumped, it increased. It is a rising epidemic in our culture. We could spend a lot of time trying to figure out why and where, but we're just going to deal with the fact that it is here today. And it's not just in culture, but it's also in our military. Our son is active in the Air Force, and he and his wife tell us about suicide and thoughts of suicides and attacks within their friends in the military. Today, there are more deaths by suicide than deaths of those people in action. Today, when I'm recording this, on the front page of every newspaper, it's about the suicide of someone in Fort Hood. And the rate of suicide of boys versus girls, boys are much more prevalent to perform suicide. But this is not just something that happens here in America. It is a global problem. Every country, every culture around the world struggles with this, some more than others. And some people will say, well, gee, it's a problem because they don't have enough faith. They don't read their Bibles enough. They're not spiritual. They're not strong enough. Let me tell you, that is a falsehood. That is not true. There are people throughout history who have been men and women of faith who have struggled. I remember being on the roof of a friend in Delaware, helping him repair his roof. When we were working, he opened up and talked about the constant thoughts of suicide. Now, this was a spiritual man. He's a man who loved Jesus, who read his Bible. He was a leader, a teacher in his local church, and yet he struggled mightily with it for years. Now, as an example from the Bible, let's take a look at King Solomon. He was known for his wisdom and wealth and writings. He got over $1 billion, that's billion with a B, of gold imported to him every year. He wrote books of the Bible. He wrote songs. He wrote proverbs. He was an accomplished person. He was well educated. And read this. So I hated life because the work that is done under the sun was grievous to me. All of it is meaningless, a chasing after wind. This is not some teenage boy in angst or he got rejected by his girlfriend. This is a mature, well-educated man, a man of accomplishment. He doesn't have any want for money or anything. And what does he say? He hated his meaningless life. Maybe you've heard the expression, vanity of vanities, all is vanities. And that's the idea that it's smoke, it's soap bubbles. How would you build your life on smoke? How would you put anything on top of it? You can't. Soap bubbles won't hold anything up. And he says, so my heart began to despair over all my toilsome labor under the sun, in Ecclesiastes 2. His heart is hurt. His heart is just aching because of despair and toil. Here is a video, maybe you've seen it, of a boy putting bricks on top of his head, one after another. It's despair, it's toil. There's no change, there's no hope, there's no chance of it getting better. This is exactly how Solomon feels, and he says, What's the point? Why should I change? It just gets heavier and heavier and heavier. And I take those bricks off my head, I deliver them, and what happens? I come back for another load. Maybe that's exactly how you feel about your life. It's one thing after another after another. Solomon also said he was under the sun. Have you ever been on your rooftop in the daylight in the summer? It is exhausting. It is hot. You feel the heat radiating up. This is what he is saying about his life. Elijah, a godly man, he announced a great drought. He was sent by God to a brook. He was fed by ravens. He was then sent to a widow. He then met and conquered 400 priests of Baal. He uh, he got rid of them. They were killed because they were enemies. Fire came down from heaven. And after all of these great things that he has done, all these spiritual success stories, Jezebel says, I've had it. I'm going to kill you. And what does Elijah do? He performs a Forrest Gump. Elijah was afraid and ran for his life. Run, Elijah, run! When he came to Beersheba in Judah, he left his servant there. 1 Kings 19:3. He was afraid for his life. So what did he do? He didn't stand. He ran. His well had run dry. He's like, I can't take it anymore. And what does he do? He goes into isolation. This is a common theme throughout people who are with depression and thoughts of suicide. They feel alone. You can be alone in a crowd. So he goes alone, and what happens? While he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness, he came to a broom brush, sat down under it, and prayed that he might die. I have had enough, Lord, he said. Take my life. I am no better than my ancestors. Now, we here in North America have tall trees we walk under and can sit in a tree or in a chair, but not in the Middle East. It's really a glorified bush. And he says, he crawls underneath of it and sitting down and says, I have had it. I have had enough. He has come to the end of his road, and he has seen the road sign that says, end of the road. And that's where he feels and cries out to God. He says, I'm done. Or what about Jonah? He ran from God, he ran to God, he ran with God, and then finally, after leading the greatest evangelism meetings in history, he runs away, builds a house on a hill, and just says, I want to watch God kill these people. And God makes a plant grow up to give him shade. But when the sun rose in Jonah 4:7, God provided a scorching east wind, and the sun blazed on Jonah's head so that he grew faint. He wanted to die and said, it would be better for me to die than to live. He just has had enough. You ever bought one of those turkeys or one of those chickens, then you put it in the oven and it has one of those little things that pop up. It says, I'm done. He has come to the point, his little thing has popped up and said, I am done. He was alone. He was under the heat and exposure to the sun, and he was having all of these physical hardships. It's one thing on top of another. It was disappointment that God hadn't killed the people to him. Now you say, well, that's weird. That doesn't make sense. Feelings of depression and feelings of suicide have nothing to do with logic. But God said to Jonah, is it right for you to be angry about the plant? It is, Jonah said. I am so angry, I wish I were dead. You know, Jonah is a frustration, confusion. He's hot, he's irritable, he's under all this pressure, and now it is anger. Think about anger and the idea of when you make a charcoal pit and you get those briquettes going and you get it nice and hot. That's anger. He has poured the lighter fluid on his soul, and he has lit himself up inside with anger. And what about Paul? He worked hard. Everywhere he went, it seemed like he snapped his fingers and churches just sort of popped up. But he was shipwrecked. He was stoned. He was left for dead. He was beaten. He was whipped. And he says in 2 Corinthians 1, we do not want you to be uninformed, brothers and sisters, about the trouble we experienced in the province of Asia. We were under great pressure, far beyond our ability to endure, so that we despaired of life itself. Indeed, we felt we had received the sentence of death. He says, I don't want you to be uninformed. He said, let me tell you, let me shoot straight with you. Now, there are two ways to be uninformed. One is to stick your head in the sand and not listen, or to go la 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 and put your fingers in your ear. The other way is just to totally ignore reality. Looking at me, if you know me or have seen my face, brushing hair, I only have to do it once every 3 or 4 days, whether I need it or not. Now, I could spend a lot of time in front of the mirror brushing and combing and using gels or whatever, but that would be ignoring the problem. Paul says, I want you to be informed so you know what kind of pressure we're under. Pressure is not the pancake on the top. Pressure is the pancake on the bottom. You got one after the other, after the other, after the other on top. It's the pressure of things coming on top and on top, and he has received the death sentence. When you receive the death sentence, you're a prisoner and you're not going anywhere. You are locked up, you're chained up, and he's saying, I'm chained to my past and all of these problems in the future. Now, as we summarize all of their conditions, these four godly men, they were in physical harm, they were emotionally alone, there were the sun, the heat, things are coming in on them, but they then chose a different course. They could have said, I'm here and these circumstances have me down, but they chose a different course. Solomon says, now that all has been heard, here is the conclusion of the matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the duty of all mankind. For God will bring every deed into judgment, including the hidden things, whether good or evil. He says, God is on his throne. God hasn't left. God hasn't fallen asleep. God hasn't turned away. He still pays attention. And we have to realize this and respond to who God is. We got to get into a moving truck and move from the what and the why to the who. Solomon says, yeah, I could sit here and talk about all the problems I have and all the inconveniences and the sun and everything and my feelings. And all of those things may be true. But I need to move from the what to the who. Elijah, God sent him rest. He was comforted and fed by angels. And in 1 Kings 19, he is then given more to do. He says, you can't just stay looking at the past, Elijah. When you drive the car, you look at the front mirror, the front window. Yeah, you look in the rearview mirror every once in a while, but you got to look forward. And he says, God says to Elijah, Elijah, there's more for you to do. There are things I want you to do for me. You have great value. And what about Jonah? In Jonah 4, God confronts him and then says, why are you comparing people to plants? God speaks straight to Jonah. He tells him things that maybe are hard to hear, but he tells him those things. He speaks truth into his life. I remember being in an insurance company where I was employed, and I was the number one guy. And the reason I knew that is every year I got an award. And I got a new vice president to report to, and I went into his office just a few days afterwards, and he sat me down and he said, Chet, I don't know that we can work together. And I said, what do you mean? I'm your number one guy. And Les spoke life and truth into me. He says, that scene from A Few Good Men, you can't handle the truth. Let me tell you, I needed to hear those things. Those were hard words. They were harsh words, but he spoke truth into my life and changed the trajectory of my life. Paul says, but these things, all these bad things happen that we might not rely on ourselves, but on God who raises the dead. Oh, God raises the dead. Let me take you back to 2,000 years ago. The crucifixion occurred on Golgotha, sometimes known as Calvary. But the tomb where the resurrection occurred was very close by. They didn't have to drive for days and days. It's very close by. And there is the truth. God takes the dead and raises it. He's the one who changes things, and what that means, it's not on us. It's on God. We may have a dead marriage, a dead career, a dead dream, dead finances. Anybody can bring something good out of good, but God takes the pain and the suffering and the failures of my life and your life and transforms them and resurrects them. The pressure is on him. Paul continues, he has delivered us from such a deadly peril, and he will deliver us again. On him we have set our hope, and we will continue to deliver us. I used the illustration of a stack of pancakes earlier. Well, guess what? There are stacks of pancakes that are like 3 or 4 or 5 high, and then there are stacks of pancakes that are 20 or 30 or 40 pancakes high. It doesn't matter how many things are on top of us. The question is, where is the pressure? Is it on me to fix myself and to fix the situation, or for us to cry out to God and say, God, you've got to do it. I want to be your willing servant. I want to cooperate. And we want to see God's faithfulness. He has delivered in the past. He will deliver in the future. We need to be waiting on God. Maybe you've been betrayed by someone. Maybe someone has said that they would do something and they didn't. Or maybe they did something evil to really harm you and your reputation. God is not like that. God doesn't have his fingers behind his back saying, oh, I'm going to trick you. I'm going to make a promise and nana boo boo. I'm going to change it and trick you. God's not like that at all. Paul goes on to say, as for you, help us by your prayers. Then many will give thanks on our behalf for the gracious favor granted us in answer to the prayers of many. Oh, prayer is a great thing, but it's a prayer of a community. It's not just, do you remember all those people were alone. But Paul says the community of people who were praying, they were informed, but they were also infused into the problem. They were helping out. So here are some important steps to take. First is Psalm 67:1 says, may God be gracious to us and bless us and make his face shine upon us. God initiates the relationship. While we were just totally screwed up and foreigners and enemies, God reached out and sent Christ to die. And God is seeking us for a face-to-face relationship. So are you and I seeking God's face? A face-to-face relationship means there's nothing in between us. There's nothing hidden. It's all out there. He says his face shines upon us. That means he gives us his all, his goodness, his glory, his love. But he also speaks truth into our life. Am I willing to have that kind of face-to-face relationship? And also, everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. We will be rescued. This is great assurance. But you'll notice that there's nothing in this promise that says who call upon the name of the Lord will be saved today, that they'll be saved this week, that they'll be rescued in this life. Dear friend of mine had cancer, and he was on the radio, and he was talking about how he was going to be healed from his cancer. And the phones lit up on the call-in show, and everybody's saying, how do you know? How do you know? How do you know? And he answered it with great assurance, but great calmness. He said, I am going to be healed of cancer in one of two ways. It could happen in this world, but if not, it'll be when I see Jesus face to face, because Revelation 21 says, look, God's dwelling place is now among the people, and he will dwell with them, and they will be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death, no more mourning, no crying or pain, for the old order of things will be passed away. There will come a time. Right now, there's pain. There can be great frustration, uncertainty about what's going to happen today. But God says, when we are living with him in all eternity, he's going to be with us. There'll be nothing to hide. There'll be nothing to move away from. Now, I don't know where you are. I don't know whether you have thoughts of suicide. I really don't struggle with them, except one time in my life. I had gone through a great spiritual high, if you will. I had had surgery, life-saving surgery, and we rejoiced. We were so It was a roller coaster ride. The surgeon said he could die on the table. Maybe he'll just be paralyzed the rest of his life. And we cried out to God. There was emergency surgery. I came out and I could move my hands and my legs again. And we rejoiced, and it was so great. We sang praises to God. But then came the healing process. I was alone in our apartment. Marianne was working. And in that loneliness, I couldn't drive to be with other people. And the pain, I sunk down into depths of feeling sorry for myself, but then that led to feelings of depression and suicide. Thankfully, I don't struggle with that, but I've been there. Jesus understands those feelings. He's on the cross, and what does he say? My God, why have you forgotten about me and forsaken me? Jesus understands those feelings. And let me put to bed the lie that says people who commit suicide are condemned. I don't believe that. I don't believe Jesus teaches that. I don't believe the Bible teaches that at all. As a wrap up, about a year or so ago, Kay and Rick Warren were interviewed on CNN about the tragic suicide of their son Matthew. And in this interview, they talk about how Matthew knew he was going to heaven. Matthew knew the assurance he had, but the pain of what was going on inside of him. He said, Dad, I can help people, but it's just not working for me. And he said, Dad, why can't I just end it all? And Rick said some very wise words. He said, even your pain has a purpose, and I'm not willing to give up. Yeah, we've seen the best doctors, we've seen the best medication, support group, prayer, it all. Rick and Kay have virtually unlimited resources, but it wasn't enough. Somebody put it like this. You work and you strive to be an Olympian. You're selected, you're on the team, you have it, you march through the stadium, and then you perform. And I think about those gymnasts who go through all that preparation, and then they perform the routines. They do all these amazing things. They flip, they spin, they tumble, they do all of these things, and comes at the end to land. And then they stumble and fall. They're still an Olympian. They still can get the award, the gold, maybe not the gold, but the silver, the bronze. But they fell at the end. It's a tragedy. I have my one grandfather committed suicide. I've had two cousins who have committed suicides. One of Marianne's uncles committed suicide. It's painful for the people who are left behind, but God knows your heart. If you're having feelings like this, I beg you, get help. Talk to someone. Get help. And Jesus is there for you to walk in your pain. Would you pray with me? Our Father and our God, I thank you that you love us and that you walk with us in the pain of life. Thank you that you are with us and you want to put a guardrail around us and have done that in you. In Jesus' name, amen. Next week, we start a new series. God bless and bye-bye.